it's Ileana and I have a card to share with you today. I'm going to be using several pieces of cardstock. I've labeled each piece and the TE is for Tailored Expression and the C9 is for Concord and Ninth. I'm going to be using these three dies that are from Taylor Expressions and they just trim out these little strips for you. I'm adding some of the Nuvo glue from my glue press onto an A2 size panel. And I'm just going to be adding the adhesive running along the edge and just adding the cardstock to create my pattern. I've gotten a lot of questions about the glue press, and some of the troubleshooting that I'm going to share with you today is if you are using the glue press, put it back in the holder each time and make sure that the tip of your nozzle is touching the silicone disc. The disc is what keeps the air from getting in. You might get a little bit of adhesive that drips out while it's sitting in there, and it's just the adhesive that's in the nozzle. When you go to pick up your glue press, you might see that there's a glue plug, and just use your fingers to pinch that off. It will pull out whatever is inside of that little nozzle, so it'll kind of like uncork it. And you might have to press a little bit harder on that initial application after it's been sitting for a while. After that, the glue will be flowing just fine. And be sure to put it back in the holder so that it is sitting securely in there. And if you plan to leave it for several days, I would just suggest putting the cap back on. If not, you might need to use the needle in the lid to unclog it. It's still glue. It's not going to prevent it from never ever clogging if it sits in there. It might. It's adhesive, and it also depends on the type of adhesive that you use. I know that some people like the Barely Arts glue or the Glitter Arts, I think that's what it's called, and those are thinner glues, so they might create a little bit of a different issue for you. So just use your common sense and just remember it is glue and it does dry. But aside from that, this works great for everyday crafting. Now I just used my T-square ruler to trim down some of those longer pieces just so that I have shorter pieces to work with as I add them to the corner of this card front. I like the little T-square ruler because it does have the little metal guide and it lets you get your blade up close to it just because it lays a little bit flatter than a normal T-square. And you can also get the T-square to fit inside your original size MISTI. You can close the lid with it inside. Now I'm just creating my card base and I'm going to add my panel to the front of this card base. I did pop it up with a little bit of adhesive. I don't show it, but that's what I did do. I am going to be adding a sentiment to the front of this card. I decided to go with the Simon Says stamp, a big thank you. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted a solid shadow or a vellum. So I'm going to go with the vellum simply because you can see the beautiful pattern I created with the cardstock, and I don't want it to obscure it or cover it up. Now, vellum is a little bit tricky to add adhesive to because if you smudge your adhesive, it kind of shows. So I'm trying to be very careful on how I add my adhesive. So it's probably a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. But I do have a piece of metal underneath my cutting mat, so that allows me to use my magnet to hold things down. So I just added a little bit of adhesive to the T, and that will anchor down my piece. I don't really do that with the U because the U is shorter and I'm able to use the tweezers to put that piece down. But now that I know that the T has been anchored down, I'm going to add a little bit more adhesive just to make sure. And I'll use my fingers to separate the vellum and the black sentiment so that I'm able to add more adhesive. You only have to do this for the first layer. I do add extra pieces on top just to add dimension, and I just layer the pieces on top. I find that, see, I'm removing the little glue plug that was on top because it sat for a little while. So I just use my fingers to pinch it off. So it does happen, so just be aware of that. So I'm just doing a little bit at a time just because the thank is such a long word for to adhere down, and I'm just adding a little bit at a time. Now that it's completely adhered down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some dimension to the back so that way it'll pop off my card. And so I'm just going to add it to the back of the vellum. Instead of trying to put little pieces of foam tape underneath, I'm just going to add some more die cuts to the back, and that will pop it up a little bit. You can do as many layers as you want. I believe I did 3 on each side. So the thank you has 3 on the underside and 3 on the exposed side. So I'm just going to let that dry, and then I'm going to add it to the front of my card. So once it's adhered, I can just let it dry, and I'm able to add some gems to it. And with the glue press, you can add very little glue to the back of it, and if you need to, you can go back and add more to it because the nozzle is so fine. I'm using tweezers to set it because I don't want to get glue all over the front of my card. I'm just going to let it sit there for a little bit, and then I'm going to add some gems. These are from Pink Fresh. I don't believe they sell the case anymore, but you can get the gems individually. So I'm going to pour some out and use my crystal katana. You just need to twist the tip of the crystal katana in your fingers, and it warms up the little bit of wax that's on it and allows you to pick up your gems to place them. Once I figure out where I want it to go, and I do have another sample that I had done earlier, so I'm using that as a guide to figure out where I want to put my gems. I do struggle with gem placement, and so sometimes it takes me forever to figure out where I want it to go, and then I take pictures and I send it to my friends, and I'll say, what do you think about my gem placement? And we go back and forth. We both do it to each other, and so it's kind of comical if you really think about just a minute little detail like that we spend so much time trying to figure out where it goes. So I'm just going to use the tip of my katana to pick up the gem, and then I'll add a tiny little bit of glue. And that's pretty much it. I did make several of these because when you do the die, it does give you extra pieces. And so I just made enough cards until all of the little strips were used up. Thanks so much for stopping by. I am happy to share this card with you, and be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. And don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Have a great day. Bye.